या मुहम्मदुन सय्यदुल कौनैन कौनैन या मुहम्मदुन सय्यदुल
87. बिस्मिल्लाहिर्रहमानिर्रहीम रेडियो रमदान 87.7 FM। मैं हूं आपका मेज़बान ज़ुबैर अकरम। रमज़ान मुबारक ग्लासगो में आज कुछ लोगों के लिए आज शुरू हुआ। आज यकम रमज़ान है और बहुत सी मसाजिद ने गुज़श्ता कल ऐलान किया रमज़ान के शुरू होने का। तो गोया रमज़ान मुबारक की आज 2 तारीख़ और आज इफ्तार का वक्त है 5:36। As we started yesterday, this is Reflections from Radio Ramadan at 87.7. If you're listening to us on live stream on our website, radioramadan.scot. Time just now is 4:30 in our studios. Actually it's 4:40. The time just now is at 4:40 just now, and iftar today is going to be at 5:36. As every year, alhamdulillah, this is 30th year of Radio Ramadan, and around maybe 20th year, I've lost count, reflections with Sheikh Rizwan. So reflections with Sheikh Rizwan Muhammad. This reflections will be available to you on our YouTube channel as well after this program ends, and also on our Facebook. Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
Ahlan, welcome to this reflections. I think it's 20th consecutive year, possibly, maybe more, I can't remember, but probably 20 odd years of reflections on Radio Ramadan. Now, we are here in Glasgow, and Glasgow's community is almost used to listening to reflections before they open their fast. And alhamdulillah, this year it will be another series of say 25, 26 programs running up to Eid, where we will be discussing, as we discussed, Surah Fil, Surah Fil and Surah Quraysh together. Before we start on to discussion, we start a discussion on Surah Fil and Surah Quraysh. We will just like to have some reflections on Ramadan itself today. How we started yesterday with Shahru Ramadan al-Lazi unzila fihi al-Quran, jisme Allah Ta'ala is ordaining us to fast, the philosophy of fasting and its relation to human life, its relation to our life, how fasting helps us in our worldly pursuit and also in our spiritual pursuit. What's the relevance of Ramadan in our life?
Okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Wa salatu wa salamu ala Muhammad wa alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And welcome to this, which is our usual Ramadan reflections show, which is going, as you said, going for a number of years. And as is always the case, we kind of choose, or I was reminded that we made a choice maybe a couple of months ago that we were going to do a certain chapter. I didn't actually think that we were going to do it, but I think you took it a bit too seriously and you decided to make a poster saying we're doing Surah Fil. Because you were in my front room. I just said, look, you can discuss any chapter of the Quran, even the smallest chapter. And I think you mentioned Surah Fil or something. And then we said, yeah, why not? But I didn't actually intend to do the chapter because, I didn't intend to specifically do it, but inshallah we can cover this over the space of Ramadan if we're given life to it.
I was actually quite surprised that we could cover Surah Fil, hardly 5 episodes.
Yeah, so Surah Fi is always tied in, as we will probably discuss, with Surah Quraysh. And so they're kind of paired together. But my point was essentially a wider point about reflection of the Quran. So that I think I was basically talking to you about the fact that we have stopped reflecting on the Quran and extracting all the indications on how we should live our lives, and also how we should take anecdotes and lessons from history so that they can be applied to today. So, for example, history is always seen as something that's quite dry, disconnected, and irrelevant to human society. And I, when I was younger, probably felt very similar. What's the point of, studying the First World War, the Second World War, why it happened, or Alexander the Great and his escapades across the earth, and Bonaparte and all these things. But obviously, once you get older, you realize that life is made up of patterns, is made up of a sequence of events that repeats itself. And in your own life, you see yourself making a decision, and it becomes a mistake, for example, and you learn from the mistake. And the next time that same scenario comes into your life, you make a choice, but the choice is based upon your previous mistake, and therefore you rectify the mistake. And in fact, I think it's Einstein that said the sign of stupidity is to not learn from your previous mistakes, is to do the same thing again and again and expect a different outcome. Because you can take it from a personal perspective in your life. You may have an argument with a friend or a family member, and it keeps happening the same way. They call it Groundhog's Day. It happens again and again the same way, and you don't actually try and intervene and check how you're making decisions, and then on that make a better decision. And so the Quran is essentially a book which is has a plentitude of amthal, which are we would call anecdotes or aphorisms or paradigms that repeat themselves again and again and again. So this is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَيَضْرِبُ اللَّهُ لِلنَّاسِ أَمْثَالٍ. And so Allah strikes these similitudes. Similitudes is a good way of saying it as well. And these similitudes are done so that we reflect and we act, and it makes our life better. And so in Ramadan, essentially, we have this opportunity when the intensity of the fast should aid us in reflecting on the Quran. So this is essentially شهر رمضان الذي أنزل فيه القرآن. The month of Ramadan is the one within which the Quran was given as a descending revelation for mankind. هدى للناس. So this is what I'm saying. It's a guidance for humanity. Now, you only need a guide when you're lost, you're perplexed, you're in a state of uncertainty in your life. And this means every single person that's listening is guaranteed to be in a state of uncertainty in something in their life. Like if I'm thinking now, I can mention 5 off the top of my head that are big issues for me in my personal life, and I would imagine everybody listening would have 5 that they could rattle off without any difficulty of saying these are the things I can improve on, or these are things I'm not sure about, even if it's to do with the hereafter. I mean, imagine that you have a very pious person listening to this, and they have no problem in their worldly affairs, their family affairs, their community affairs, their health, everything. They're still worried about their status, or they have to be, and they should be worried about their status with God. Like, where are you in your relationship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in terms of worshipping God? Even if you take it to the highest status of ihsan and perfection in worship, do you worship God as if you see him? Which is the status of ihsan, which the Prophet described in the hadith of Jibreel alayhi salatu wasalam. So again, Ramadan comes to the whole community, the whole ummah, as a collective, and it comes in light of all the experiences that we're having in the Muslim world as well. So every year it comes, it's a different conversation. Every time we start the reflection show, it's a different state of affairs in the world. Like we're in the midst of what happened today is, I checked, woke up in the morning, and then there was the BBC website had something unprecedented about the arrest of a citizen of this country who was previously a person to whom we would be subjects. So the brother of the king being arrested in the UK. which is
Yep.
unprecedented. To troll through history to find out anything similar, and they couldn't find anything similar. And with that, you have the Epstein files, which is just unraveling of secret files or public files, which just tells us what we already knew. It's not as if anybody thought this wasn't the status quo. In fact, we know it's probably much worse. Well, it just tells you that the world is moving in the direction that the Prophet ﷺ told us. Because in the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said, "An ta'budallaha ka'annaka tara," that you worship God as if you see Him, which is the state of ihsan. The Prophet then was asked about the hour, and he said, ﷺ, that the one being asked is no more knowledgeable than the one that's questioning. And then he was asked, what are the signs? And the Prophet said, "An talid al-amata rabbataha," that the woman gives birth to her mistress, to her overlord, the one that will try to discipline her. In other words, the child or the offspring will try and discipline the parent or the mother. وَأَن تَرَى الْحُفَاةَ الرُّعَاةَ رِعَاءَ الشَّاءِ يَتَطَاوَلُونَ فِي الْبُنْيَانِ, and you'll see destitute, barefooted Bedouin vying to build tall buildings. So the month of Ramadan is the month within which the Quran comes. The Quran was given to the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ unveiled everything that would happen till the Day of Judgment. And every time Ramadan comes, we're seeing the reality of that unfold, not the opposite. We don't see it disproven. We see it manifest and essentially vindicated. And we're just saying, subhanAllah, we have to reflect on what he brought. So this is what's fascinating for me, is every year it's just a further vindication of the prophecies of the Prophet ﷺ, the prophethood of him ﷺ, knowledge that he had. And so we're forced to then go back to the Quranic message, which is the core of his teaching, and reflect. I mean, that's why I was joking with you that, Surah Al-Fil, you could speak until the end of time over something is 4 verses.
Yeah, but yes, every verse, that's another, this is another topic, that how Quran could be talked about, even one ayah for maybe 20 episodes, leave alone a full surah. As you said, Sheikh, I was going to say, but I've stopped. Okay, we're living in unprecedented times, but maybe not. It's always been like this. Something extraordinary happens in every phase of history. We are just experiencing it right now. It's not something which is extraordinary in its absolute form. It's because we are experiencing in our lifetime something different. Or is it the case that historically it is probably the most unique point?
So it's not the most unique point. I mean, things and analogies and sequences reappear in history. So you have the good and the bad, the ugly is always the same. There's somebody good, there's somebody's bad, there's somebody's more worse, uglier. And oppression and justice and truthfulness, all these concepts are still the same. Courage and generosity, they're all the same, but they manifest in different ways. One thing that's unique for us is that we have an overview of what's happening in a way we didn't have before. You have surveillance systems like Palantir, this kind of American governmental, basically undercover surveillance project, which is basically looking and checking everything that's happening in the Western world and using it against Muslims in the West, in the East. You have that, and you have that march on of technology, and you have the artificial intelligence aspect of it as well, language learning models, and these are all within the next 5 years said to increase and envelop every single aspect of human life. So these are unprecedented from the perspective of the technological advance. But in terms of the privation and poverty of the human being, I think we are also living through a very interesting stage where just what it means to be human, what it means to be a husband or a wife or a son or a daughter or a friend or a companion is changing completely, because everybody is being made into a discrete unit that purchases and is essentially just a consumer. has no relationship to anybody else apart from the fact that they buy and sell. And from that perspective, that's unique as well, because each of us now has your ID, your passport number, your ID, electronic identification data, and you have a debt to the state. And at that point, it is very unique, because you can't just absolve yourself of that and become a citizen of another country without having to go through a process of applying. So it's very interesting time. It is unique, but the archetypes which the Quran talks about, the munafiq, the believer, the one that knows and hides, the person that openly disbelieves, all these things are archetypes that exist. The person that's miserly, the person that is haughty and arrogant, sees themselves as being, you know, somebody that cannot be replaced in the cosmos. These types of people still exist. But what changes is the environment or the scene or the setting within which these people appear. So Haman, you know, Musa and the Prophet, you know, Idris, all these are historic figures, but what they represent reappears even in our day now. The mocker, the jester, the oppressor, and the freedom fighter, they all exist. The person that speaks truth to power still exist in this day and age, and they're different. And so for us, it's to recognize that.
Names change, the characters are there.
Yeah, the characters. So the backdrop, like you got a very nice backdrop in the studio there. That backdrop can change into a different culture, a different time, different place. Everything changes. But the human being's nature does not change. The Prophet said that if the son of Adam had two piles of mountains of gold, he or she would have wanted a third. And nothing fills the mouth of the son of Adam illa turab, except for the dust of their own grave. So that's not going to change. If you think of the top 10 richest people in the face of this earth, it's exponential. What is it now? 300 billion probably. I have no idea. I don't keep a track of who the most richest person is. But essentially, they're not satisfied with that, because the reason I know that is because they will continue to use legislation and try and avoid taxation to the point they have even more wealth and even more power. And, you know, you think of a couple of days ago, I was listening to the chairman or one of the owners of Manchester United Football Club complaining about the fact that that this country, which is the UK, is full of immigrants, and there's a colonial presence of non-white people on the face of the UK landmass, not realizing that he doesn't pay any taxes to the country. And so if he's talking about the British economy, he's somebody who's so greedy that he won't pay back and pay taxation. And yet he can criticize other people for being here who pay tax. So that archetype is still, that for me is a Quranic archetype. That's a perfect example of somebody we would expect to exist in real life, because the Quran just set out all these amazing archetypes that will appear and will exist. And we have to, as Muslims, go back to the Quran and not just read it for, you know, racking up the rewards for each letter. We say, you know, alif lam mim harf, alif harf wa lam harf wa mim harf. Prophet said it, but we restrict it to just that. We say, okay, the Quran is just something you read, and mystically and magically you get reward for it, almost like a computer game or one of these games on your smartphone. And we actually do the Quran a disservice by not reflecting upon its message, which essentially in the Day of Judgment you'll be asked about.
Inshallah, we'll pick up on this theme of relationship of Quran and the month of Ramadan. Reflections with Sheikh Rizwan Muhammad, Radio Ramadan 87.7. Time just now is 4:58. Iftar today is at 5:36. Short ad break, and inshallah we'll be right back.
हमने आँखों से देखा नहीं है मगर, हमने आँखों से देखा नहीं है मगर, उनकी तस्वीर सीने में मौजूद है, जिसने लाकर कलामे इलाही दिया جس نے لا کر کلام الہی دیا وہ محمد مدینہ.
A is for Allah, B is for Bismillah, R is for Radio Ramadan 87.7 FM.
حضرت سلمان فارسی رضی اللہ بیان کرتے ہیں کہ آن حضرت صلی اللہ علیہ وسلم نے فرمایا، اللہ تعالیٰ بڑا حیا والا، بڑا کریم اور سخی ہے. جب بندہ اس کے حضور اپنے دونوں ہاتھ بلند کرتا ہے تو وہ ان کو خالی اور ناکام واپس کرنے سے شرماتا ہے.
Big Day Events, Scotland's biggest Asian caterers and event planners, specialists in full wedding packages with access to numerous venues from countryside retreats to 5-star hotels. From 100 to 1,000 guests, we can cater for your event without compromising in quality or service. Ensuring a successful and carefree event for you, call Big Day Events on 07 855 861 802 or visit us on bigdayservices.com.
Everybody made dua.
M. Suleiman Group, proudly serving independent retailers for over 50 years. Scotland's trusted #1 cash and carry, offering household essentials, hardware and electricals, DIY supplies, toys, greeting cards, balloons and event products, all under one roof. Thank you to our loyal customers and staff for being part of our journey. Visit M. Suleiman Group on Stromness Street, Glasgow.
اسٹرابری گارڈنز، بہترین، خوبصورت، صفائی بے مثال، آنکھوں کو بھائے، دل میں سما جائے. اسٹرابری گارڈنز، 4th Street, Polkshields, Glasgow.
آج میری پیشانی پہ قسمت نے چوما ہے ماہ مقدس میں.
Values of the Ark, the new media enterprise hub.
Partnership. We will increase connections and establish networks to strengthen collaborative work.
Radio Ramadan 87.7. Sound for the soul.
Reflections is sponsored by Can Law Solicitors. We specialise in personal injury claims. Call us on 0141 378 0514. Can Law. If anyone can, we can.
ہم نے آنکھوں سے دیکھا نہیں ہے مگر، ہم نے آنکھوں سے دیکھا نہیں ہے مگر، ان کی تصویر سینے میں موجود ہے، جس نے لا کر کلام الہی دیا، جس نے لا کر کلام الہی دیا وہ محمد مدینے میں موجود ہے، میں موجود ہے. پھول کھلتے ہیں بڑھ بڑھ کے صلی اللہ، پھول کھلتے ہیں بڑھ بڑھ کے صلی اللہ، جھوم کر کہہ رہی ہے عباد صبا، ایسی خوشبو چمن کے گلوں میں کہاں، ایسی خوشبو چمن کے گلوں میں.
Radio Ramadan 87.7 program Reflections with your host Zubair Akram and my guest Sheikh Ridwan Muhammad. Just before this break, we were talking about Subhanallah.
الہی دیا جس نے لا
Yeah, so we were talking about the relevance of Quran with this month of Ramadan. Very academic, in a way that this topic has been spoken about in almost every Ramadan. Just want to talk about it again, Sheikh, and kind of dive into it and try to find meaning for it today, 2026, February, and see what it means.
Yeah, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So, I mean, I was kind of intonating to that, kind of indicating towards the fact that the Quran is relevant because the same paradigms, the same people appear in different forms throughout human history, and they're not unconnected. So, history essentially is that subject that allows you to realize and study an event that took place in the past and identify themes, identify factors that led to a specific situation taking place. And then what then happens is that you try and implement that or apply that onto a specific situation you're in. So it's a practical thing that you can do in your own life in terms of your own experience. Is a type of history. It's a type of experience that you've done and you've reflected upon, and an intelligent person then takes that on into the future. So that's one aspect of why the Quran is relevant. But the other thing that is directly connected to that, which we just kind of started off discussing before the break, was the fact that that cannot take place until we are active partners in that process of reflection and active process partners in the study of where we are and looking for the paradigms in the Quranic text that will help us. So essentially, if you take, for example, the situation in Gaza, for example, or the situation of Muslim countries, one with another, you look at the situation within Europe in terms of, just picks like population decline, for example, in terms of economic corruption, social corruption, political corruption. These are all aspects, I think, that you will find resonate within the Quranic text because you've got the same archetypes in the Quranic text as well. So if you wanted to go from the most political, international, to the most personal, specific to yourself, you would find something there. The missing point is always this issue of reflection. So my point before the break was that we've made the Quran into something which is essentially what the Quran says is mahjura. Mahjura is like basically thrown away or ignored or made something that is distant from our lives. And this is what the prophets will say. The prophet will say this, alayhi salatu wasalam, when he will be asked about, why did your community not implement the revelation? But my community, اتخذ القرآن mahjura, they took the Quran as being something that is to be distant from their life, their practical life. We've made it something, either you place it very high up on the shelf, only to be used for deaths and marriages, or we make it something that we don't touch at all, that we don't ever open up for any situation. We've not made it something that we open and reflect, and we constantly go back to and check. Like, so there's lots of studies now about people looking at how much they check their smart devices, so their smartphone or their social media account or Instagram or Facebook, whatever it is, something interesting, or their WhatsApp messenger or something. If they're busy in work, if their interest is work and money, then it might be WhatsApp, it might be some other platform. But there's this sense of checking in. What's happening? What's of relevance to me? And that's not the way we check in with the Quran. It's not to say that you just keep open every 2 seconds, you look at the Quran, you look. But the thing is, there should be something that if you look at it once in the morning, there's a point of reflection which then takes you on this journey throughout that day of thinking, how is it relevant? So this is what they call in sociology reflexive thinking, or even philosophy, reflexive thinking, which is to engage with thought, to take an idea and then let it simmer and let it stay within the mind, and then allow it to grow and take its own being, its own existence, and it grows into something. And it's at that point you start to realize its relevance to your own life. And this is what's called tadabbur. Tadabbur. أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ أَمْ عَلَىٰ قُلُوبٍ أَقْفَالُهَا. The Quran says, do they not reflect and ponder over the Quranic text, or are their hearts sealed? Or do they have, locks on their hearts? So why does the Quran want us to reflect? It's because it is of benefit to us. So I think what we have to ask is why we're not reflecting. Who is it that's telling us not to reflect? And therefore, the relevance of it will become clear if you do reflect. So there is.
Sheikh, why the reminder? I mean, what if it is such a great solution? And not doubting it. I'm questioning so that we can all understand. If it is such a great reminder, so the way I see life is a set of decisions. You always have to make decisions for yourself, for people around you, your relationship with others, your relationship with yourself, your relationship with the collective, say, law-abiding body that you are living under, say, in a country or a city or a council or a town. Now, you navigate your life with a set of decisions on daily basis, on quarterly basis, on a yearly basis. This is how I am. Now, are we saying that people who are out of sync, out of touch with this revelation Quran will make poor decisions?
So is that your question?
Yeah.
Okay, it's a very good question, because there's two aspects to this, isn't there? There's one aspect which is worldly, and there's another word which is otherworldly. So dunya wal akhirah. So we know deen wa dunya, that kind of idea of the religion, this world and the hereafter. So first of all, we have to know that there's decisions that are made for both. And the thing the Prophet came with was that he came with guidance in terms of your interaction with both. So in terms of the world, you have a number of narrations, which the most famous of which is the Prophet passed by two people, or a group of people cross-pollinating the date palms. It's a very famous instance of the nakhla.
I think wasn't it grafting? Okay, maybe.
Yeah, it's cross-pollinating, grafting, and it was something that was passed down from generation to generation. And the Prophet said, if you were to leave it, la salahat. If you were to leave it and not do this, it would perhaps be okay as well. It would grant fruit. It would provide fruit. And they did it. In other words, they left aside what they were doing. They just left it as it was. So they took the Prophet's advice on. And later on, the Prophet passed by the same group of people, and they complained about the fact that the harvest didn't produce fruit. And obviously the Prophet knew them, and he knew what he said to them. And he said, Antum a'lam bi umur dunyakum. You have more knowledge of the affairs of this world than obviously himself. Meaning, not that he didn't know, but that this is your realm. Your realm is deciding crops, plantation, when to sow, when to reap your crop, investment, etc. You could go to the whole thing. Do you want to invest in gold, or do you want to invest in stocks and shares? Do you want to have money in the bank? To this day, you can have a similar thing. So was his revelation relevant to that? It was, because he said he provided the ground rules, which is religion is not necessarily engaged in those types of decisions, apart from the broad stroke of what is just and what's not. So decision is essentially based upon your intellect. أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ. Do you not think? So your reflection in the Quran is also based upon the fact that you have to have the faculty of thought. So if you don't use the faculty of thought in your worldly life and how to make a good decision, make an efficient decision, your ability to approach the Quran will be hindered as well, because you don't have the capacity to think. So prior to coming to the Quran, you still have to develop the capacity to think. And I would say critical thinking as well, because how do you know that Islam is true rather than another religion? You have to have a critical mind. You have to be able to look at all the options and think about them and say, okay, this makes much more sense because the revelation is preserved. The person that brought it is somebody we can study. His motives can be ascertained. And there's no reason why I would reject it given what I know. And also everything he said has come to be true. No contra indications in terms of his teachings, in terms of economy, in terms of spiritual life, in terms of morality. It's all essentially underlining what he said. So the critical mind takes you to the Quran.
So this is a total. Okay, this is a total different approach from how we were raised.
Mhm.
It's like Quran is almost like a nervous calming book.
Mhm.
It's a calmer for your nervous system. It
Okay.
calms you, yeah.
Okay.
It eases you to make decisions and to think. But what you're saying is you sharpen your thinking faculties so that you can approach Quran.
Mhm. But then when you this is my point, you only understand the Quran and its relevance and its relevance to your situation and to being a source book of true revelation once you use the critical mind. Now then once you start to then adopt it, you come with a different set of assumptions. وَيُسَلِّمُ تَسْلِيمًا. That's where this idea of submitting completely comes in. And this is where I wouldn't contradict what you're saying in terms of if you're saying that you're brought up thinking of the Quran as a means of soothing the nervous system and bringing it to tranquility.
Yeah.
This is part of what you now accept as being itmi'nan and this tranquility of the soul. أَلَا بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ تَطْمَئِنُّ الْقُلُوبِ.
Yeah.
You know, this constant effervescence of the spirit and lack of tranquility within the spirit can only be brought to, you know, this tranquility through connecting it back to its creator and the qualities of the creator and the guidance of the creator. So dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
So the yearning to connect with God through recitation. Something maybe you were covering in your course that you're doing, tasawwuf. Is that?
Yeah, so I'm doing a course on prophetic tasawwuf, and we've kind of reached the discussion about adhkar and awrad and dhikr. So dhikr is a means of repetition of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's names and remembering Allah's qualities and what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provides us in terms of a framework of existing that brings that tranquility, brings that complete it's almost like a child that gives up all of its affairs to the mother. So it totally relies upon the mother, and when the mother is there, it becomes calm and it has this soothing effect of the motherly presence. The Quran in and of itself has the same effect because everything's agitated. The world, if you were living for the world and you were worried about your income or anything that's of difficulty on the horizon in your life, what brings into perspective is the fact that the Quran says that the hereafter is hayawan. It's the hereafter that is real life. It's real existence. It's real lived experience. Whereas then this is just something that you come into, you come crying, and you leave, as a lot of the scholars said, you leave laughing when you're about to die because you're leaving this world, you know, knowing that it was nothing great. Because when it finished, nobody stayed here. Everything they have here disappears, and you're going on to something much more distant and much more everlasting. And so, yeah, you come in with a critical mind, but once you've accepted it, it has this function of being essentially a guide. Hudan wa nur. And this is why even in the verses that you mentioned, شهر رمضان الذي أنزل فيه القرآن هدى للناس وبينات من الهدى والفرقان. It is guidance from mankind. وَبَيِّنَاتٍ مِنَ الْهُدَى. And it has clear indications towards what guides. وَالْفُرْقَانِ. And also how to judge and make decisions, going back to your question. فَمَنْ شَهِدَ مِنْكُمُ الشَّهْرَ فَلْيَصُمْ. And therefore, to honor that book and honor the fact that there was a time in history when it came down to the Prophet ﷺ and he was given the physical experience of the angel coming to him and grasping him. To honor that, فَمَنْ شَهِدَ مِنْكُمُ الشَّهْرَ فَلْيَصُمْ. Whoever witnesses the month in which that happened, remember it's a lunar month, isn't it? فَلْيَصُمْ. They should fast. And so even that thing of decisions usually are worldly, and worldly goes on a solar calendar. Like, you know, tourism, for example, follows a solar calendar. Your accounts, your your kind of taxation, you're sowing the ground, agriculture, travel, everything follows a solar calendar, doesn't it? And that's a beneficial worldly benefit. But what follows a non-solar calendar, which a lunar calendar, is things that are otherworldly. And so Ramadan, Hajj, these, Rabi al-Awwal, all these time frames are not synced in with worldly. They're synced in with otherworldly benefits. And so, the
But surely
fast for us...
so there isn't a segregation as such. We are trying to achieve this otherworldly through this world.
Yes, you're trying to do it in sync. So it's almost like a parallel existence where you're trying to juggle the fact that, at a certain point the fast was longer, now it's getting shorter. And with the fact that that, every summer you have this time free and your children might be going to school and they'll have examinations, all based on the solar calendar. But you're having to then, also ride upon a rail track, which is essentially for another worldly benefit, which is the akhirah, which is related to the Quran and the Revelation and the Islamic month, which, if you look at Muharram, if you look at Dhul Hijjah, if you look at Ramadan, you look at Shawwal, Sha'ban, these are all months that are marked down. Rajab, for example, these are all months that are marked down for their religious benefit, otherworldly benefit. Rajab, for example, you've got Nisf Sha'ban, you've got Ramadan, you've got the 27th night or the odd nights of Ramadan. These are not solar marks, these are lunar marks, and they change throughout the solar calendar. And so we're actually charged with trying to balance the two things and realize that they both have their own benefits. A worldly benefit will not always lead to a religious benefit and vice versa. So it's very difficult from that perspective to say we can have, what we say, your cake and eat it, have deen and dunya. At a certain point, the dunya is going to disappear. So there is a hierarchy, there is a prioritization, which is, you can't just say, okay, I want, a lot of people say, I want the deen and dunya for my children. I want them to be successful in the deen and the dunya. Yes, absolutely. In terms of being successful and trustworthy and honest and upright, yes. But at some point, you're gonna pass away, and at some point they'll be on their deathbed as well, and they would give everything for having their deen and their religious, moral priorities at the forefront of their life at all points in their life when they made decisions. So every decision you make, absolutely, there's worldly decisions, but there's ramifications. I mean, if you were to think about just worldly benefit, this is why, Islamic, the rules of war are very much tied into the hereafter, and the fact that you cannot kill innocent people, you cannot oppress people, you cannot initiate warfare, even though in a worldly manner it might be beneficial to do that. It might be beneficial to do all those things, but we don't just look in a worldly manner, even in things that are worldly. We look in a otherworldly manner, which is why when Sayyidina Abu Bakr sent the armies to Asham, he gave, in the Muwatta Imam Malik, he gave them 10 pieces of advice, only one of which was related to how they should be with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All the rest were to do with what you cannot do on the battlefield. Okay, so because you cannot sell your hereafter for the benefits of this life. You cannot cut trees down, you cannot destroy the hives of bees, you cannot kill women, you cannot kill children, you cannot kill monks. That's all in the detriment of this world, because if you did do that, you might be able to vanquish and destroy the enemy quicker, but you're not allowed to do it. And so sometimes these decisions are mutually exclusive. You have to prioritize your moral, spiritual, otherworldly benefits for this worldly benefits.
प्रोग्राम रिफ्लेक्शंस सामीन, मैं हूं आपका होस्ट ज़ुबैर अकरम। आज की जो आयत है जिस पे हम शेख रिजवान से रिफ्लेक्शंस ले रहे हैं वो है कि रमज़ान वो महीना है जिसमें कुरान नाजिल किया गया, जो इंसानों के लिए सरासर हिदायत है और ऐसी वाज़ेह तालीमात पर मुश्तमिल है जो राह रास्त दिखाने वाली और हक़ व बातिल का फ़र्क खोल कर रख देने वाली हैं। लिहाजा अब से जो शख्स इस महीने को पाए उसको लाजिम है कि इस पूरे महीने के रोज़े रखे। और जो कोई मरीज़ हो या सफ़र पर हो तो वो दूसरे दिनों में रोज़ों की तादाद पूरी करे। अल्लाह तुम्हारे साथ नरमी करना चाहता है, सख्ती करना नहीं चाहता। इसलिए ये तरीक़ा तुम्हें बताया जा रहा है ताकि तुम रोज़ों की तादाद पूरी कर सको और जिस हिदायत से अल्लाह ने तुम्हें सरफ़राज़ किया है, उस पर अल्लाह की किब्रियाई का इज़हार और एतराफ़ करो और शुक्रगुज़ार बनो। आयत का आखिरी टुकड़ा एक दफ़ा फिर कि अल्लाह तुमसे नरमी करना चाहता है, सख्ती करना नहीं चाहता। इसलिए ये तरीका तुम्हें बताया जा रहा है ताकि तुम रोज़ों की तादाद पूरी कर सको और जिस हिदायत से अल्लाह ने तुम्हें सरफराज किया है, उस पर अल्लाह की किब्रियाई का इज़हार और एतराफ़ करो और शुक्रगुज़ार बनो। उस पर अल्लाह की किब्रियाई का इज़हार और एतराफ़ करो और शुक्रगुज़ार बनो। हम शेख से ये दरियाफ़्त कर रहे थे कि रमज़ान का और कुरान का क्या ताल्लुक़ है और कुरान किस तरह से हमारी ज़िंदगियों में आसानी लेकर के आता है। और शेख ने ये बताया कि कुरान को समझने के लिए अपनी सोच को उसके लिए खोलना पड़ता है, अपने ज़हन को उसके लिए आमादा करना पड़ता है और फिर कुरान हमें अपनी तरफ हिदायत के जो उसके मोती हैं वो हमारे दामन में बखेर देता है। मैंने शेख से ये पूछा कि कुरान तो सुकून क़ल्ब का बायस भी है और अगर उसको पढ़ा जाए, उसकी तिलावत की जाए और जो सुकून हमें मुयस्सर आता है, उसकी वजह से हम कुरान को समझ सकते हैं। तो ये दोनों चीज़ें साथ-साथ चलती हैं, पैरेलल हैं कि हम सुकून भी तलाश करते हैं और उस सुकून के तरीके उसके वसीले से, उस सुकून की वजह से हम तफक्कुर बेहतर तौर पे कर सकते हैं, हम तदब्बुर बेहतर तौर पे कर सकते हैं और अल्लाह रब्बुल इज़्ज़त ने कुरान में हमें तदब्बुर करने, फ़िक्र करने, सोचने, निशानियों को देखने और निशानियों को देख के अल्लाह तक पहुँचने का रास्ता दिखाया है। शेख just a summary of again in last few minutes we have of what we have covered and what we will be covering inshallah in coming few episodes.
Yeah, so basically our idea was to in the coming episodes is to cover reflections and tadabbur, which is a deeper reflection of a couple of chapters of Quran, which will be Surah Quraysh and Surah Fil. And so these are connected. These two chapters are connected, and they're essentially, most people would say they're historical chapters, so that they indicate a specific historical period. And so there's not much focus and there's not much reflection over the meaning of them. But I remember I indicated to you the fact that human life is essentially an attempt to understand patterns so that you act better. So, your parents might have told you some piece of advice from their experience that they hope would help you in your life. They probably pushed you towards a specific profession or a specific way of approaching life that was based upon their own experience, but not necessarily always the correct thing to do. Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu is related that he wrote some advice for one of his sons, Muhammad al-Hanafiya, and it was his wasiyah to him, and he's basically said, do not raise your children up based upon how you were raised, because they were brought up in a different time from yours. So there is sometimes differences, but there's always some very important leitmotifs and lessons and outcomes that are always there. And this is what the Quran usually focuses and almost always focuses on, which is in the situation of Surah Al-Fil. There's a very interesting historical narrative which has, I think, further ramifications for ourselves. Also, its connection with Surah Quraysh is also very interesting as well. So this is just a reflection on two chapters, small chapters, very, very small chapters. But it all comes back to this thing that we discussed at the beginning, which is that the month of Ramadan is the month within which the Quran was revealed as a guidance for mankind. And that means every single section is equally valid as an act of reflective prose, reflective, nathar as a source. And so, opening the mind up, being critical initially, and then allowing the Quran to be the source of your reflection, I think opens up so many opportunities in terms of decision making, in terms of guidance, And it's only once you start to do that, once you get into the practice of doing that, that you're able to actually implement that, inshallah.
Would Surah Fil also give us some indication of how to deal with this overpowering nations like Abraham coming, attacking, and people defending? Will there be relevance to our times?
I mean, this is it. I mean, I would say that I'm not sure what we'll reflect upon. So it's not as if I'm going to draw up. It depends on how you're questioning it. So, as we always do, I don't have a specific, start and end point for each discussion. But I mean, at the very core of it, you'd imagine it's about, it's about colonialization, isn't it? It's in some way. But it might not be. We might not even touch upon that at all, because we might find a different thing which we reflect upon is much more powerful. And therefore, you'll have to build on that other alternative reading. This is why I don't think it's always useful to predispose yourself to one way of looking at the Quran. It's reflection. It's about, okay, what is the chapter? When was it revealed? What are the main themes of the chapter? What's the main words that come out? Sometimes even the tajweed of the chapter as well. Sometimes people don't reflect upon the way that the words are pronounced and they were given to the Prophet ﷺ has an effect on how they actually have an impact. Because these are Meccan chapters, which are, in terms of tajweed, in terms of orthography, in terms of just simply pronunciation, are different from how the chapters in differ as well. All that will have to come out, and once you build that up, the reflective process actually gets to this maturity, and then you say, okay, this is what the chapter essentially is telling us today, because it will say something different in some way to what it said to people before us, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair, Sheikh. This is all the time we have for reflections with yourself tonight. I'm going to leave the listeners and the viewers with this beautiful naat that I've been listening to. It's one of the Arab brothers who've read this in Urdu. So I quite like it, the way he has tried very hard in pronunciation, expression. Enjoy. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Assalamu alaikum.
मगर उनकी तस्वीर सीने में मौजूद है, जिसने लाकर कलामे इलाही दिया, जिसने लाकर कलामे इलाही दिया, वो मोहम्मद मदीने में मौजूद है, छोड़ना तेरा तैबा गवारा नहीं, छोड़ना तेरा तैबा गवारा नहीं, सारे आलम में ऐसा नजारा नहीं, ऐसा मंजर जमाने में देखा नहीं, ऐसा मंजर जमाने में देखा नहीं, जैसा मंजर मदीने में मौजूद है। हमने आँखों से देखा नहीं है मगर, हमने आँखों से देखा नहीं है मगर, उनकी तस्वीर सीने में मौजूद है, जिसने लाकर कलामे इलाही दिया, जिसने लाकर कलामे इलाही दिया, वो मोहम्मद मदीने